A viscous, damp, almost palpable silence hung over the waters of the Western Dvina in the pre-dawn hours of June 22, 1944. This was not the blessed, pacifying silence that promises a peasant a calm summer day and a good harvest, but a heavy, oppressive stillness, such as occurs in nature before a colossal destructive atmospheric discharge. A thick, milky white fog, rising from the river, cooling during the short summer night, thickly covered the lowlands and floodplains, reliably hiding the opposite bank and turning the visible world into a narrow, confined space of trench and parapet. The German observer, wrapping himself in his greatcoat against the piercing morning dampness and constantly wiping the fogged lenses of his stereoscope, once again tried to discern some movement on the eastern side, but saw only a swaying gray veil. To him, as to thousands of his comrades in arms dug into the long-suffering Belarusian soil, it seemed that nature itself had entered into some mystical conspiracy with the enemy, hiding the preparations of an invisible giant. In the air, despite the freshness of the river, there was a distinct smell not only of marsh mire and decayed last year's leaves, but also a barely perceptible alarming smell of heated engine oil and diesel exhaust, an aroma that, to an experienced soldier, unmistakably indicated the presence of a huge amount of equipment, lurking somewhere very close, beyond the limits of visibility. Vitebsk, an ancient city on the hills, at these moments resembled a sleeping leviathan, entangled in kilometers of barbed wire, riddled with trenches, and bristling with gun barrels. The city slept a restless sleep, not yet knowing that its fate had already been definitively decided on operational maps in distant headquarters, and that, in a matter of hours, this treacherously calm fog would be torn to shreds by a storm of fire and metal such as the history of wars had not yet seen on this section of the front in all the previous years of confrontation. To fully comprehend the scale of the impending catastrophe for some, and the grandeur of the design for others, it is necessary to rise above the trench truth and look at the uniqueness of the geopolitical configuration that had developed by that moment. The front line in Belarus by the summer of '44 formed a gigantic, unnatural salient, deeply protruding eastward, which military analysts and cartographers of all warring parties called the Belarusian Balcony. In the very center of this salient, like a massive keystone holding the entire architectural structure of the arch, lay Vitebsk. For the German High Command, this transport hub was not just a tactical point on the map, but a sacred symbol of the inviolability of their presence in the Eastern Territories. Declared a fortress city, or Festerplatz, by personal order of the Führer, Vitebsk was, according to the plans of Berlin strategists, to become an impregnable breakwater. The logic of the German General Staff was simple, geometrically precise, and, as it seemed on paper, impeccable. By holding major transport hubs, bridges, and river crossings, one could tie down enormous forces of the advancing enemy, dismember their Udarnia groupings, deprive them of freedom of maneuver, and force them to bleed out in futile frontal assaults on urban fortifications. This doctrine of rigid, static defense, which categorically forbade any retreat without a personal written order from the very top, turned the city into a giant trap for its own defenders. The garrison, consisting of experienced but war-weary divisions, in those June days still believed in the impregnability of their positions, relying on powerful concrete bunkers, minefields, and a deeply echeloned system of trenches built up over months. They believed that the balcony would stand forever, as it had stood in previous years. However, on the other side of the front, in the forest areas hidden from aerial reconnaissance, A strategy had long been developed and put into action that was destined to overturn all classical notions of modern warfare. The operation, code-named after the celebrated commander Pyotr Bagration, was based on a fundamentally different, innovative approach. Instead of the expected stereotypical frontal pressure to which the enemy was accustomed and for which they were preparing, the Soviet command opted for a grand deception and an incredible, extreme concentration of forces on narrow, carefully selected breakthrough sectors. For many weeks, something unimaginable, defying the logic of ordinary military logistics, was happening in the Belarusian forests. Hundreds of thousands of people, thousands of tanks, self-propelled guns, and artillery pieces moved exclusively under the cover of night. During the day, the front seemed deserted, plunged into the sleepy, lazy routine of positional warfare. Field kitchens smoked, snipers lazily exchanged fire, soldiers dried their footcloths. But as soon as dusk fell, a titanic hidden movement began, resembling the work of a giant underground mechanism. The troops maintained a regime of complete radio silence. Any communication on the air was forbidden under pain of court-martial. Camouflage reached the level of high art. Tanks turned into haystacks, guns into bushes, and entire battalions dissolved into the forest thickets. This colossal work of secretly concentrating strategic reserves led to a stunning result. German intelligence, usually astute, meticulous, and accurate, found itself completely disoriented and blinded. Abwehr analysts confidently reported that the main strike would be delivered far to the south, in Ukraine, where the open-steppe terrain favored tank maneuvers, and completely overlooked how the steel fist was being raised over the swampy, impassable forests of northern Belarus. When the roar finally broke the silence at dawn on June 23rd, it was like a tectonic shift or a sudden earthquake. The artillery preparation, which began simultaneously along a vast stretch of the front, was of such monstrous density and power that the familiar landscape began to change literally before the observer's eyes. Defensive structures, which had been built for months with German thoroughness, disappeared in minutes, turning into a smoking, plowed field where earth, concrete, twisted metal, and human bodies were chaotically mixed. But the most terrifying thing for the defenders in these first hours was not even the number of falling shells, but the frightening accuracy and methodical nature of the fire. Soviet artillery, thanks to the brilliant intelligence work the day before, did not just fire indiscriminately, hoping for luck. It surgically and precisely knocked out communication nodes, entrenched command posts, and enemy artillery batteries, instantly blinding and deafening the entire complex defense system. In the very first 120 minutes of the battle, the German command lost control of its troops. Telephones were silent, wires were severed, antennas blown away. Generals' orders did not reach their executors. Panicked reports from the front line were lost in the air, jammed with crackling interference and foreign voices. And tactical reserves, which tried to advance to the breakthrough line according to pre-planned schemes, fell under a devastating wall of fire even before they could deploy into battle formation. Chaos began to spread through the German rear faster than Soviet tanks. It was here, in the smoke-filled sky over Vitebsk, that a factor emerged which would later become the subject of careful study in military academies around the world, from West Point to the Frunze Academy. The factor of absolute, total dominance of a new type of aviation. If at the beginning of the global conflict the sky belonged entirely to German aces in Messerschmitts, now the situation had changed diametrically and irreversibly. Soviet IL-2 attack aircraft, dubbed Black Death, or flying tanks by German infantry, hung over the battlefield continuously, echelon after echelon, creating a so-called death conveyor over the enemy's heads. They acted not merely as a means of support, but as an independent strike force, completely isolating the combat area from the outside world. In this air war, a crucial technological aspect also became apparent. For the first time, the Germans encountered the massive use of new types of Soviet munitions, including small-caliber anti-tank cumulative aerial bombs. Attack aircraft dropped them by the hundreds, covering vast areas. These small bombs, falling on the roofs of tanks and self-propelled guns, the most vulnerable points of armored vehicles, burned through the armor. The vaunted Tigers and Panthers, formidable and almost invulnerable in a duel with tanks on the ground, proved completely defenseless against this deadly rain from the heavens. Any attempt by the enemy to move equipment, bring up fuel or ammunition along roads, was instantly thwarted. The sky, which once offered hope for salvation and cover, now brought only an inevitable threat. Soviet pilots worked in close, almost telepathic interaction with ground air controllers who were directly in the forward echelons of advancing infantry and tanks. This allowed for strikes with pinpoint accuracy, literally 1 to 200 meters from their own troops, clearing the way for tanks and riflemen like a giant fiery broom. The development of events on the ground resembled the swift, relentless closing of giant steel pincers. The 39th Army, using the forested terrain, bypassed Vitebsk from the north, while the 43rd Army broke through from the south. The Soviet command, having learned from the bitter experience of past years, wisely did not storm the fortified city head-on, avoiding protracted and bloody street battles. Instead, a brilliant tactic of deep encirclement was applied. Tank wedges broke through seemingly absolutely impassable swamps and thickets, reaching deep into the rear of the German grouping. Here, the external visible layer of the conflict manifested itself. An epic clash of two military machines, two schools. One was shackled by rigid, outdated dogmas of static defense and a belief in concrete, while the other demonstrated wonders of maneuverability, initiative, and disregard for the difficulties of the landscape. German divisions, bound by the Führer's strict order to their positions, found themselves in a fatal situation. Their flanks were open, their rear cut off, and their supply routes intercepted by mobile detachments. The commander of the 3rd Panzer Army, General Reinhardt, an experienced, old-school military leader, perfectly understood what was happening. Leaning over the map in his bunker, he saw with horror how fat red arrows inexorably closed in behind the 53rd Army Corps, defending Vitebsk. His professional intuition, honed by years of service, literally screamed at him about the need for an immediate, urgent withdrawal of troops before the neck of the bag finally slammed shut, while there was still a narrow corridor to save people. But here, a second, internal, psychological layer of conflict came into play. The high drama of personal choice, responsibility, and fear. Reinhardt, like the Corps commander General Gollwitzer, was under the monstrous pressure of a categorical order from Berlin. Vitebsk could not be surrendered under any circumstances. The city was a fortress, and the commandant of a fortress had no right to retreat, only to die. This insoluble conflict between obvious military expediency and blind obedience to political will paralyzed the will of the German command. In the headquarters, an atmosphere of nervousness, hysteria, and doom reigned. Officers, understanding the real state of affairs, realized that their soldiers, living people, someone's fathers and sons, were being sacrificed to empty ambitions that had nothing to do with the reality on the battlefield. Every minute of delay in the order to break through cost hundreds of lives. At the same time, Soviet commanders, from front commanders to regimental commanders, acted with unprecedented enthusiasm, excitement, and creativity. Generals Bagramyan and Chernyakhovsky, who coordinated the actions of the fronts, demonstrated the highest class of operational art. They outplayed their opponents not only by numbers, but also by skill, speed of decision-making, and daring of their plans. They knew, time works for those who move. Particular, close interest in the events unfolding near Vitebsk was shown by representatives of Polish military circles who were part of the advancing troops and in the headquarters. For Poland, whose army was painfully reborn in the fire of battles, dreaming of the liberation of the homeland, this battle became an invaluable visual lesson in modern command and strategy. Polish officers with notebooks in hand carefully observed the virtuoso organization of interaction between different branches of the armed forces. They saw with their own eyes that modern war is not just the individual heroism of individuals or cavalry daring, but a complex, mathematically precise symphony, where each instrument, heavy artillery, tanks, assault aviation, engineering troops, must enter on time, precisely, and in the right tonality. Polish observers paid special attention to the communication and control system. By this point in the war, Soviet troops used radio communication at all levels, from tank commander to army commander, which allowed them to react to the slightest changes in the situation almost instantly. Polish analysts bitterly noted that it was the loss of control and rigid centralization that became the main reason for the rapid collapse of the German defense. When the German Corps headquarters lost contact with divisions and divisions with regiments, the unified, formidable organism of the army disintegrated into separate, isolated groups, blind and deaf, doomed to destruction, one by one. This experience, absorbed on the fields near Vitebsk, would later form the basis for the construction of the new Polish army, where paramount attention would be paid to issues of managerial flexibility, communication, and the initiative of junior commanders. At an even deeper ideological level, the Battle of Vitebsk became a clash of two philosophies of war and life. On one side, the Teutonic, rigid idea of a fortress, an immovable stronghold, symbolizing dominance, control over space through holding a point. On the other, the renewed tactics of swift movement, encirclement, using space and landscape as a weapon, reminiscent of ancient Scythian maneuvers, but multiplied by the power of engines. The German army, accustomed to relying on material superiority, order, and engineering structures, encountered a force that used nature itself, the chaos of battle, and dynamics as allies. This was the collapse of the myth that mechanical order always beats improvisation. In this case, Soviet improvisation turned out to be a carefully planned, flexible system, capable of adapting to any conditions, while German order became ossified, lost flexibility, and broke under its own weight. The paradox was that it was the maniacal desire to hold everything that led to the loss of everything. The desire to maintain control over every inch of land resulted in the loss of an entire army. The weather factor also added to the drama of the situation, traditionally playing a huge, sometimes decisive role in wars in the East. In the first days of the offensive, the heavens opened, and torrential rains fell, instantly turning dirt roads, lowlands, and fields into impassable, viscous mud. It would seem that this should have played into the hands of the defenders, slowed down the Soviet tank armadas, and provided a precious respite. German and French military theorists, who later analyzed minute by minute the influence of meteorological conditions on the outcome of this battle, came to surprising conclusions. The German command, relying on the mud season as its natural ally, relaxed, mistakenly believing that active tank operations on the flanks through the swamps were physically impossible. However, Soviet engineering units and rear services performed a true feat, bordering on a miracle. Working waist-deep in icy water under fire, they laid miles of log platforms, corduroy roads, directly through the swamps. They built bridges in a matter of hours, literally dragged equipment by hand, used local materials, bundles of brushwood, logs from destroyed houses. The bad weather did not stop the offensive. It only made its direction even more unexpected and shocking for the enemy, who expected an attack only along the highway. And when the cyclone left a couple of days later, the sky cleared and the hot June sun came out. The dried ground allowed for a furious, unstoppable pace, and the clear sky opened up vast spaces for aviation. Nature, as it turned out, helps not those who expect favors from it, but those who overcome difficulties with persistent, back-breaking labor and ingenuity. By June 24th, the steel ring around Vitebsk clanged shut near the village of Gnezdilovichi. 5 German divisions, tens of thousands of people, mountains of equipment, were completely and utterly encircled. This was the moment of truth, the point of no return. Inside the formed cauldron, a true hell began. Command and control of the troops was completely lost. Disparate groups of soldiers, infantrymen, artillerymen, mixed with rear units, cooks, staff clerks, rushed through the forests trying to find a way out. But everywhere they encountered dense cordons of Soviet troops. Forest roads were jammed with abandoned trucks, overturned carts, dead horses, and mangled guns. Panic, that most terrible and destructive enemy of any army, worse than the plague, gripped thousands of people. Officers lost authority, soldiers abandoned their weapons, hope for outside help dwindled with each hour, like morning mist. The Luftwaffe command, which loudly promised to organize an air bridge and supply the encircled with everything necessary, could not break through the dense screen of Soviet fighters and anti-aircraft artillery. Heavy transport aircraft Junkers were shot down on approach, flaring up like torches, and instead of ammunition, medicine, and food, the encircled received only burning debris falling from the sky onto their heads. The feeling of complete isolation and abandonment by their own high command weighed on their psyche more strongly than mortar fire. The transformation of consciousness within the cauldron happened rapidly, in just a few days. Yesterday's self-confident conquerors, who considered themselves representatives of a higher race, masters of life, turned into hunted, dirty, hungry beasts, thinking only of one thing: saving their own lives at any cost. Illusions of grandeur collapsed into the mud of the Belarusian swamps. Soldiers saw their officers tearing insignia, awards, and epaulets from their uniforms, trying to get lost in the general gray mass of ordinary soldiers. The iron Prussian discipline, based on fear and drill, evaporated without a trace. At this critical moment, an event occurred that could be called the psychological and humanitarian turning point of the entire battle. The Soviet command, seeking to avoid unnecessary, senseless bloodshed and understanding that the enemy was already broken, sent parliamentarians with an offer of surrender. The terms were simple, clear, and humane: preservation of life, food, medical care for the wounded. General Gollwitzer, in his bunker without communication or hope, understanding the absolute futility of further resistance, and seeing the suffering of his subordinates, was forced to make the most difficult decision of his life. On the 26th of June, in the afternoon, the order to capitulate was given. The weapons fell silent. But even after this, fierce skirmishes continued for several more days in the dense forests. Fanatical SS groups and individual detachments, disbelieving the order, tried to break through with combat to the west, unwilling to admit defeat, which only increased the number of casualties, already unnecessary to anyone. The culmination of this historical drama came on the 27th of June. From the forests near Vitebsk, from the swamps and ravines, endless, gray, desolate columns of prisoners stretched onto the roads. It was a spectacle of truly epic biblical scale, a visible material testament to complete victory. Tens of thousands of people in ragged gray-green uniforms, dirty, unshaven, with dull, empty gazes, trudged along the roadsides, heads bowed. And towards them, occupying the entire roadway, a sparkling, powerful avalanche of Soviet equipment moved westward. 34 tanks, heavy self-propelled guns, hundreds of American Studebaker trucks pulling cannons, the famous Katyushas. This steel stream seemed endless, full of energy and power. The meeting of these two streams, the stream of the defeated, disappearing into the oblivion of captivity, into the past, and the stream of the victors, striving into the future, to new frontiers, became a powerful symbol of the fundamental turning point in the entire war. Vitebsk itself, destroyed to its foundations, burned, but finally liberated, looked upon this procession with its empty black eye sockets of broken buildings' windows. The city endured, survived 3 years of brutal occupation, and was now returning to life, albeit through pain, ruins, and ashes. Local residents, emerging from basements, wept, looking at their soldiers. For them, the change in the front line meant the end of constant fear, the end of night raids, the end of children being driven into slavery. It was a colossal emotional outburst. The battle for the crossings ended in the complete, unconditional defeat of Army Group Center in this sector, punching a huge gap in the German defenses and opening a direct, wide road to Minsk, Vilnius, and the Baltic states. At the same time, a no less important feat was unfolding in the rear, a logistical one. Supplying such a mass of advancing troops with everything necessary, from shells to bread, in conditions of total impassability, was a task comparable in difficulty to the battle itself. Thousands of vehicles in a continuous stream, day and night, transported tons of cargo to the front. Repair crews performed miracles, returning damaged tanks to service right in the field, often under fire. The medical service worked at the limit of human capabilities, deploying hospitals in tents and surviving huts. Without this invisible, titanic work, victory would have been impossible. The scenery changed instantly. Where yesterday there hung neat German signs with Gothic script, today there already stood crudely knocked-together plywood shields with Russian names written in charcoal or paint. Time seemed to accelerate. The resonance of this battle instantly extended far beyond the dry military chronicles and operational reports. For Russia and the emerging new Soviet military school, the Vitebsk operation became a benchmark, a gold standard for the interaction of ground and air. The experience of massive use of assault aviation for the complete isolation of the battlefield, first applied here on such a scale, formed the basis of tactical textbooks and is still studied in military academies. It became crystal clear that in modern war, it is impossible to win without achieving complete air superiority. In addition, the effectiveness of maneuver operations by large mechanized units in complex, forested and swampy terrain was brilliantly demonstrated, which refuted many ossified dogmas of Western military science of that time. The main lesson lay in a simple truth: there is no impassable terrain for a motivated, intelligent, and well-equipped army. For Germany and France, whose historians would later analyze the causes of this catastrophe, Vitebsk became the grave not only for Wehrmacht soldiers, but also for the classical Prussian military tradition. It became evident that it could not adapt to the realities of total war of attrition and new speeds. The battle showed the whole world that no matter how powerful the fortifications, no matter how grand the names like Fortress City, they cannot stop an enemy who surpasses you in strategic thinking, in the speed of decision-making, and in the pace of operations. The lesson was harsh and unequivocal. Stasis in war is equivalent to death. Only those who move, change, learn on the fly, and outpace time itself survive and win. The fates of the generals involved in this drama unfolded differently, reflecting the outcome of the battle. Friedrich Gollwitzer, who endured the humiliation of captivity in Soviet camps, returned to Germany only in the mid-50s. He lived a long life, but the stigma of a general who lost an entire corps and surrendered a fortress remained with him forever, a heavy burden on his conscience. For Soviet military leaders such as Ivan Bagramyan, Vitebsk became a springboard to new heights of glory. Subsequently, already a marshal of the Soviet Union, he always recalled this operation with particular warmth and pride as an example of high military art, where victory was achieved not by a frontal assault, but by intellect and cunning. He managed to prove to skeptics that an offensive in the swamps was not madness, but a precise mathematical calculation. Today, many decades after those fiery events, if one comes to the high bank of the Western Dvina in the area of the former Vitebsk port, one can see how the calm, dark waters of the river still flow unhurriedly to the distant sea, completely indifferent to past human passions and tragedies. But the memory of those days lives not only in granite monuments and on the pages of history textbooks. It is dissolved in the very air of this place. The morning fog, which still rises above the river, seems to retain the shadows of the past, the silhouettes of soldiers crossing on rafts, the roar of engines, and the explosions of shells. But now these are not shadows of threat, but shadows of remembrance and warning. Vitebsk, risen from the ashes, rebuilt anew, beautiful and peaceful, is living, stone proof that life always triumphs over death. The bridges for which such fierce, deadly battles were fought today connect not only two banks of the river, but also different generations, linking the heroic past with the present. Mentally returning to that very beginning, to the image of a solitary German sentry peering into the fog, we now, from the height of years lived, understand the profound tragedy of his situation. He looked into a future that he and his army no longer had. He stood guard over a system doomed to inevitable collapse, and the rumble he heard before dawn was not just the sound of tank engines, but the heavy tread of history itself, relentless, just, and cruel to those who came with the sword. The cycle closed. The war left these shores, leaving deep scars on the land and in the souls of people, but giving humanity invaluable blood-paid knowledge of how fragile peace is and how important it is to be able to defend it. To defend, relying not only on the force of arms, but also on the strength of mind, spirit, unity, and truth. The Battle of Vitebsk is an eternal, harsh reminder that any walls, any fortresses collapse if they are opposed by an unyielding will for freedom, multiplied by skill and courage. And in this, perhaps, lies the main, enduring outcome of those great days of June 44th, the echo of which resonates over the Dvina to this day.